In 1905, Belle da Costa Greene was hired by J.P. Morgan to be his personal librarian. The two became close, and this soon sparked scandalous rumours of an affair. Eventually, she turned his collection into one of the world's greatest libraries, making millions in the process. But Belle had a shocking secret, one that, if exposed, could have ruined everything. Belle da Costa Greene was born on the 26th of November 1879 in Washington, D.C. under the name Belle Marion Greene. But the name she was born with would not be the one history would remember. As we will see shortly, she would later change her name for certain reasons. Belle's father was Richard T. Greene. He shattered barriers as the first African American to graduate from Harvard College in 1870, a groundbreaking achievement that set the stage for his influential career. He went on to become a prominent educator, political lobbyist, and leader of the black community in Washington, D.C. His legacy grew even further when he later became the dean of Howard University's law faculty. Belle's mother was Genevieve Ida Fleet Greene, a woman who came from a progressive and prominent Washington family. She worked as an educator as well, and was a musician, meaning that Belle grew up in a home full of intellect, artistry, and ambition, an environment that would profoundly shape her early life. Genevieve and Richard had 6 children in all, after marrying in 1874. Belle's early life was liberal and relatively affluent by the standards of the time for an African American family, but was also tumultuous. Her father was on the rise, securing influential roles in both government and education, notably at the U.S. Treasury's Comptroller's Office and as Secretary of the Grant Monument Association. Meanwhile, Belle and her siblings received an advanced education at home in Washington, far beyond what was typical for the era. The family also socialized with many of the leading African American scholars and figures of the day, such as Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois, immersing them in the very heart of the struggle for racial progress. However, the family was soon torn apart by a devastating revelation. Richard discovered that his wife, Genevieve, had listed their family as white on a census return. For a man devoted to civil rights, it was a profound betrayal, not just of his work, but of their very identity. They separated as a result, though they never divorced. Richard moved to Asia to take up a position at Vladivostok, which had only recently been acquired by the Russian Empire at the end of the Second Opium War against China. There he entered a bigamous marriage with a Japanese woman named Mishi Kawashima, with whom he had 3 children. After her parents' separation, Belle and her siblings subtly altered their identities, dropping the R from their surname, changing it from Greene to Greene. Belle herself abandoned her middle name Marion, adopting da Costa to support a claim of Portuguese ancestry, a way to explain her slightly darker complexion while passing as European. Her mother followed suit, changing her maiden name to Van Vliet to assume Dutch ancestry. They could only get away with this and pass as being of European descent, despite being African American, as the family was relatively light-skinned. Over time, these fabrications deepened, fully severing ties with their African American roots. Belle and her siblings also distanced themselves from their father, and though he lived until 1922, Belle ever rarely saw him during her adult life. In 1896, Belle was offered a position at the Northern Cemetery for Young Ladies in Massachusetts, and was given a scholarship to study there. She spent the next 3 years here, followed by a summer school position at Amherst College. This position was a short one, but it was formative, and she studied the emerging field of library cataloging and archiving. This was an era in which governments and institutions were trying to order and catalog huge archives of documents which they had collected over several centuries, and which were often lying around in basements as a gigantic mass of documents. In 1902, armed with an advanced education and a specialized librarian's course from Amherst, Belle was recruited by Princeton University to work in its prestigious library and archives. Over the next 3 years, she honed her craft and gained valuable experience, putting theory into practice. It was while here that she crossed paths with Junior Spencer Morgan II. Junius was a nephew of John Pierpont Morgan, the most powerful and wealthy corporate financier at the time. Like many other titans of the Gilded Age, the family had begun using their wealth for philanthropic activities, and Junius was a notable patron of the library and art collection at Princeton. Impressed by Belle's expertise, he recommended her to his uncle in 1905, when the banking magnate decided to hire an archivist and librarian to organize his own huge and ever-growing collection of books and documents. This would be the beginning of a new and fascinating life for Belle. Long before it became the world-renowned Morgan Library and Museum, the seeds of this cultural treasure were sown in the late 1850s by the young ambitious J.P. Morgan. Barely in his 20s, Morgan was already captivated by the art of handwriting, meticulously collecting rare specimens that would ignite a lifelong passion for the written word. But this was just the beginning. As Morgan's wealth skyrocketed, so did his insatiable appetite for collecting. This fascination exploded into a breathtaking empire of rare books, ancient manuscripts, stained glass, exquisite drawings, old sculptures, and much more. By the time Belle was introduced to him in 1905, Morgan's collections had grown into a chaotic labyrinth of treasures, a glorious mess of artifacts, with no order or system. A library, after all, is only as good as its ability to be navigated. Without structure, it's just a building filled with wonders no one can find. Belle, with her sharp intellect and visionary approach, stepped in to transform the collection. But would she be up for the job? When Belle da Costa Greene was hired in 1905, the future Pierpont Morgan Library was far from the public institution it is today. Tucked away in a private building on Madison Avenue, it was essentially J.P. Morgan's personal treasure trove. Belle stepped into the role of Morgan's personal librarian, tasked with taming the mountain of material. With precision and determination, she began cataloguing the collection by theme and type, transforming chaos into order. For the first time, items could be located without endless searching, turning the messy hoard into a functional library. But Belle didn't stop there. Over the years, she organised events and exhibitions, pulling back the curtain on Morgan's private collection. In time, Belle's role expanded far beyond that of a librarian. She became a trusted confidant and a kind of personal assistant to Morgan. As the Morgan family's reputation for philanthropy grew, so did the number of individuals seeking funding for artistic, scholarly, and cultural projects. Everyone wanted a piece of the legendary banker's fortune. Belle, with her sharp instincts and discerning eye, took on the role of gatekeeper. She became the first line of defense, meticulously screening these hopeful petitioners and their proposals. Only those she deemed worthy of Morgan's attention made it through. Eventually, Belle's closeness to Morgan inevitably sparked rumours, whispers that the relationship was more than just professional, and these have lingered on for over a century. When they met in 1905, Belle was just 26, while J.P. Morgan was 68. Although married, he was known for his womanizing ways and had numerous mistresses. Greene even confessed to having a terrific crush on him. She never directly confirmed nor denied these rumours, though when asked if she had been Morgan's mistress, she reportedly replied, "We tried." Was this a mischievous tease or a cryptic admission? The truth remains elusive, but when you look at the extraordinary trust and wealth Morgan bestowed upon her, you might be convinced that there was definitely something going on. Belle eventually earned an astonishing salary of $10,000 a year, over $300,000 in today's money, an unheard of sum for a librarian. When Morgan died in 1913, he also left her a staggering $50,000 in his will, the equivalent of more than $1.5 million today. Why such generosity? Did he make her a millionaire only because of her incredible work, which is undeniable, or had something deeper bound them together? There is also the question of what Morgan truly knew about Belle's origins. Though she passed as a white woman of Portuguese descent, she was, in reality, a black woman who had carefully crafted her identity to navigate the rigid racial barriers of the time. Given the countless hours they spent together, working side by side, travelling, conversing, could Morgan really have been unaware? or did he simply choose to look the other way, captivated by her brilliance and charm? Sadly, there is no definitive proof of any of this, and one can only speculate. The consensus today is that they were probably not lovers, and that Morgan didn't know Belle's true identity. By the 1910s, it was clear that Belle's position was more than simply that of a librarian. She was in charge of managing the institution and growing its collections, although she would not acquire the title of director until the 1920s. As early as 1908, she was travelling regularly around the world to attend auctions and meet collectors, to purchase new items. Morgan, with whom she dealt with until his death, and afterwards his son and primary heir, J.P. Morgan Jr., trusted her completely and allowed her to spend their money at her own discretion. Belle's interests dictated how the library and museum developed in the first half of the 20th century to a large extent. She had a particular interest in medieval manuscripts, and as a result, the Morgan Library and Museum today has one of the largest collections of illuminated manuscripts and medieval miniature paintings anywhere in the world. A prized item is one of the earliest and most elaborately illustrated copies of Thomas Malory's La Morte d'Arthur, a medieval classic. Belle paid $50,000 for it at auction in 1911. Belle was also interested in what was then broadly categorized as Oriental, African and Asian art and literature, works from pre-colonial Africa, the Middle East, and the Far East before Western influence. She acquired pieces like the 14th century Ethiopic Gospel Book, a collection of Christian Gospels produced in Ethiopia, where the Coptic Ethiopian Church had developed in isolation from the wider Christian world. Often in bidding for such items at auction, Belle cut an aggressive figure, unwilling to be outbid when she set her eye on something of particular value. But her eye was sharp, and she did not spend excessively on items which weren't worth it. In the early 1920s, Belle oversaw the transition from the Morgan Library being a private institution which held events open to the public, to become a fully public institution. The Pierpont Morgan Library opened its doors in 1924, with Belle as its first official director, a post she would hold for nearly a quarter of a century. Initially, it could only hold about 10 visitors at a time, but the library expanded with new annexes as its collections and popularity grew. By the end of her tenure, the library housed thousands of rare books and manuscripts, tens of thousands of artistic and museum objects, and hundreds of thousands of less rare books and manuscripts. Belle wasn't just a pioneer in her field and a formidable librarian and collector. She also cut a flamboyant streak through New York society. She dressed lavishly, often wearing hats adorned with large feathers. In the jazz-filled bourbon-soaked 1920s, she was frequently seen with a drink in one hand and a cigarette in the other. She often remarked that being a librarian didn't mean she had to be reserved or quiet. She never married, likely because women were expected to abandon their careers for family life after having children. However, she did find love. In 1909, she crossed paths with Bernard Berenson, a renowned Renaissance art expert, and the two began a decades-long relationship that blended romance, friendship, and intellectual partnership. They exchanged passionate letters and spent time together in Europe and America. Despite their bond, they never lived together, as Bernard was married and Belle valued her independence. Instead, her mother Genevieve lived with her during much of her later life, and Belle also played a prominent role in raising one of her nephews. Belle only retired from her post as director of the Pierpont Morgan Library in 1948, in her late 60s. She was in poor health by then, and when an exhibition was held at the library a year later to showcase all the works she had acquired over the years, she had to attend in a wheelchair. She died a year later on the 10th of May 1950 from cancer at St. Luke's Hospital in New York. She was 70 years of age. The New York Times reported on her death, calling her one of the best-known librarians in the country. Sadly, Greene destroyed most of her personal papers before her death, and there is much about her life and work that is now obscured. Yet, her letters to Bernard survived, spanning from February 1909 to March 1949, and this is the most extensive collection of her personal papers. Her legacy is immense. Today, the Morgan Library and Museum, as it has been renamed, is regarded as one of the finest libraries and art collections in the world to have been developed out of private funding. Other than JP Morgan himself, no one was more responsible for its development than Belle da Costa Greene. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Belle da Costa Greene. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you have any other suggestions, also leave them down below in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed to have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. And that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.